Hello everyone, it's Quick Flash again, and I'm here to tell you a bit more about EmuFlight version 0.2.3. Now, for those of you that didn't know, in version 0.2.2, the dynamic filters, the dynamic Dterm and the gyro dynamic filter, should both be fixed and should now be dynamic. Done some testing on a whoop, haven't had a chance to use it on a larger craft, but it seems much better than it used to be, especially better than version 0.2.1. And today, the big new feature that I'm going to be talking about is what I'm calling the smart Dterm smoothing. Now, the whole idea behind the smart Dterm smoothing is simply this. If we look at this log here, we can see that there's just a lot of annoying noise in this area. So this line here is your Dterm, this is your PID, and this is PID sum, gyros, and motors. And anyways, you can see looking at it that the real contributor to all this noise here in your PID sum is the Dterm. You know, your P-term, it gives a little bit of noise, your I-term nothing, and your D-term, it contributes most of that noise. And you can see that some of this noise from the D-term gets transmitted right there into the gyro. You know, you see this noise here, right there in red, you can see it. And what I find most annoying is just look at this. You look at your D-term, and look at this. It's ridiculously, not ridiculously, but it's messy. Right here, this is just noise. But as soon as your D-term starts moving, it smoothens itself out. Like, look at this right here. That is good. And if you didn't notice, I don't have my smoothing turned on. I like to look at logs this way without smoothing on. But as you can see, near, low values of D-term give you this jagged, noisy mess there. But once you go higher, it cleans itself out, like you can see over here, and you can see that repeated over here. You know, as the D-term gets bigger, it cleans itself up for the most part. So what this feature, the smart Dterm smoothing is you set a number, and that number correlates. It'll correlate directly to this value. So you see how it says pitch D is 3.3. That actually means 33. And what this does is the lower that your D-term values are, the more that it will filter it and shrink it. And the way it does that is it looks at the average of the last two D-term readings, and depending on how small that is, it will filter your D-term more. So if it looks at the last two readings and it goes, the average of your last two readings is quite high, right here on D, that's 337, just get rid of the decimal, 337. It's not going to touch this at all. It's going to leave it be and let your D-term do its thing. It's not going to mess around with it. However, down here near the center, it's going to look at this and it's going to say, it's going to look at all this noise here and really just crush a lot of that. But once the D-term gets bigger, it's going to stop filtering it. And I'll just show you how that'll look in the GUI real quick. Open that up. So in the GUI, it'll just be here. Once this builds, if it builds. Come on. There we go. Okay, there we go. So there you can see it. Get smart Dterm smoothing. So the default is 50. which if you look at black box logs, that correlates to a value of 5%. So yeah, 5%, that's, not a ton actually. If we look at, yeah, this is our Dterm. If we look here, pitch D at about 5%, that looks about like that on a log. So right there, that's about right where it would stop filtering is anything above that, and everything below that it would filter more. Have done some flying on this, and it did perfectly fine. No issues to report. I ran it all the way up to 100. Still no issues. So that's just something you can mess with. If you run a value of 1, it'll be essentially doing nothing. But yeah, that's really the logic behind this filter. I'll put it in the OSD just for now as we test it. I feel like this is a feature that once we figure out a nice default value, you shouldn't really need to touch it anymore. It should be kind of more of a universal thing. So I'm going to set it as a default of 50, allow you to mess with it in the OSD right next to your filters and everything. And once we figure out a value that just seems to work really well, then we can remove it from the OSD, change the default, and make it just a CLI only thing. I'm hoping that this filter works out and is useful. Thanks for all your time helping to test EmuFlight, and have a good one.